Hey, Megan, did you come up with that intro line yet?
You didn't tell me that was today.
Hey everybody, this is usually the Writer's Room with Sam and Jim, but today this is the Writer's Room with JR and Megan. In honor of our first year under our belt, we're going to review some of the best and most interesting pieces of advice, tips, tricks, and tools we've talked about over the course of 43 episodes. But first, it's time we formally introduce the fourth member of our team, Megan Dane.
Yay, I'm official!
All right, it's good to have you here officially.
I'm not just lurking in the corner anymore, loving you guys from a distance. I'm officially in the room.
Everyone who's been on the show should know that Megan was listening in the whole time.
Yeah, but you know, I wasn't talking shit or anything. I was basically politely supporting everything everyone was doing.
She was very, very supportive.
No, I mean, I love this show. I'm super excited to be an official part of the team because I literally have been just loving this show from a distance. And then, you know, you guys sort of invited me to come in and send in on some recordings. And I'm like, hey, yeah. And then that's cool. And then hey, do you want to actually talk sometime? Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess I could do that. I'm not sure if I have anything interesting to say, but I'll sure try.
I think you got a ton interesting to say. And let me brag about you for a second for everybody out there. Megan is a very talented writer, and you just got your first staff job on Games People Play on BET. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah, I started off as a writer's assistant on season 1, and I got a freelance. And then season 2, I was very, very fortunate that the showrunner, Vanessa Middleton, brought me on staff.
Well, that's awesome, and I'm really excited, and I'm excited for all of our listeners to get to know you more through the course of our second season that is going to be starting with our next episode.
Yes, super excited for season 2.
All right, pull up a chair and sit in the room. Let's get into it.
Let's do it.
One of the coolest things about a writer's room, and our podcast's writer's room is no exception, is that
We're in it? Oh.
Yeah, that is the coolest thing.
Oh, sorry. I'm fucking up the script. Sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, JR.
I'm very new at this. I don't yet know how to riff. One of the coolest things about a writer's room, and our podcast writer's room is no exception, is that every single person in the room is a writer. And though we have different responsibilities from EP to staff writer to writer's assistant and script coordinator all the way down to writer's PA, we all have our sample scripts. Sam and Jim have even worked on a sample since we've been working on this podcast, and I know they've mentioned it on air a couple of times. I'm working on a sample. Megan, I assume you're working on a sample script?
What makes you say that?
I'd like to think that I'm not the only one in this pain.
You are definitely not the only one in this pain. I am working on multiple samples.
So what's driving you crazy with what you're working on your sample?
So this is actually kind of interesting because I recently had a sample that Sam and Jim were kind enough to read. And, you know, I thought I had nailed it because I've been listening religiously to this podcast and I'm like, I got all the tips and I put it all in there. And then Sam went through the entire pilot with me, scene by scene, and was like, this is what's wrong with this scene. This is what's wrong with this scene. And I was like, fuck, I thought I had it. But
I hope this was over some Writer's Tears whiskey.
God, I needed some Writer's Tears. I had a full cup and they were the real kind. No, it was not easy. And it made such a huge difference because two things that I had never really fully understood kind of became clear to me for the first time because it was in this really slow, meticulous way. And that was what point of view means when people talk about having a point of view in a script.
I don't know how anybody feels about anything. On page 1, there's only one adjective. In the entire scene, there's 2, and one's an adverb.
Okay.
So there's no way that we would know how these characters are feeling, what their attitudes are in the scene at all, in almost all these scenes. Now, we're not saying that when you write a scene, you can say, Helen comes in thinking about her 3rd grade teacher that she really hated, and it makes her mad, right? Obviously, no actor can portray that. But
yeah,
Helen sprints down the stairs panicked or furious.
Okay.
She can't believe that Patrick showed up here, which you're about to pay when she says, what are you doing here? That you can do. Just try to imagine, could Helen Mirren perform that?
and really what a scene turn is. Like Sam and Jim talk all the time about how a scene has to have a turn, and I thought I knew what that meant, but there's a way to structure a scene so that it builds toward the turn that I didn't understand until Sam explained it to me.
There's no emotional content. There's no real turn in the scene.
Every scene, we have to find some turn, and we have to make that turn not just be, holy shit, someone pulls out a gun and kills each other. By the way, you can do a whole career just doing that kind of bullshit. But ideally, whatever that turn is, reflects back to the central dilemma of that character. So it's hitting them in the worst spot.
So what's driving me crazy right now is that I now have like a stack of, I don't know, 6 samples that I'm like, oh, these are all shit now because I understand like what was wrong or what wasn't working that like nobody has ever articulated to me quite in that way before. So now I have like 600 pages of scripts to rewrite.
Well, I think that's a perfect segue into the mantra of season 1.
Yes, don't be afraid to let it suck.
All your ideas suck, and you have to let them suck. This is the most important thing. And just let it suck for a while, and then say, all right, how can I configure the scene so that comes out without me having to do that? The thing that I think is so amazing about actors is that they are willing to suck in front of a crowd.
Well, I know I'm shitty right now, so I want to just improve.
I know you say suck, but I can't suck like that. That's like, what? Going out and trying to get COVID. I can't do that. That's too much.
Yeah. Maybe have a beer. Maybe, maybe kick yourself in the nuts a couple times so you're distracted by the pain of that. And while you are distracted, just write it.
Yeah, I'm letting it suck real hard right now.
All right, we've got what's driving you crazy and how the show is helping you through it. Let's hear your top highlight from the past year, Meagan.
So for me, the number one highlight from the entire season is getting to be in the room, so to speak, with all of these awesome writer guests. Like, I love everybody bringing their creative energy into the room and getting to listen to Sam and Jim and sometimes you, JR, jumping in and building this idea. Everybody had something really unique and interesting, and I learned a ton just from listening to how other people figure things out. And I want to see all these shows.
Well, that's one of the great things about being in a writer's group is you get to hang out with writers and hear their ideas.
Absolutely.
And for you and me, who are not talking as much on the podcast as Sam and Jim are, it's like a writer's group for us.
Yeah, that's
Every
right.
single person is in our writer's group.
That's right.
And some episodes were less of a writer's group and more of a writer's panel. I'm talking, of course, about our incredible celebrity guests. In order of airing, we had Doom Patrol EP Tamara Becker Wilkinson, Hand of God creator Ben Watkins at our South by Southwest live show, Falcon and the Winter Soldier head writer Malcolm Spellman, and Carnival Row co-EP Tanya Loja.
I love to hear the behind the scenes stories of like everybody's come up and like the things that you don't know that go on in writers' rooms or in pitch sessions, right? Like,
oh, yeah.
Like Malcolm's story about the Falcon and the Winter Soldier pitch was amazing.
Oh, man, I can't even imagine how he pulled that off.
He can't even imagine how he pulled that off.
Because I think, people think I'm trying to be dramatic. I bombed the pitch, man. And I know I bombed the pitch because Nate, who ended up being, my producing, creative partner, on the show he works at Marvel, was like, you bombed the pitch, bro.
Yeah, you bombed it. You definitely. I mean, I wasn't there, but when you came in, you were
ashy. So sure that you had just trashed that entire thing.
I did. No, I want to be clear. I bombed the pitch. The only reason I got that job was because Nate believed in me, and again, we've never actually even confirmed this, but the only way I can see that I got that job, because remember, months passed before I ended up getting it. So right. My guess is everyone else got to come in, you know what I'm saying? Because I left the win on the table, and Nate was back channeling and advocating for me, you know what I'm saying? Regardless of the fact that, they basically had to take the leap of, look, dude, you suck, but you're going to get this gig. And to me...
I actually got to work with Tanya in the room on Carnival Row, and she was one of my favorite people to work with. And she had some good perspective on a good room attitude.
I felt personally challenged because, as you say, I entered the room a couple of days later, and, the first thing you said to me was, you just started today, so we don't expect you to pitch, for today. Right. And I was like, well, I just heard a challenge.
And that's what makes you good, Tanya.
Right. Don't you let me off that hook. Yeah, what do you mean?
Well, I have to pitch this. I have to land at least 5 ideas today.
And I think it was really awesome having Ben with us at South by Southwest, and his advice when he talked about buying Dodger tickets and saying that he couldn't use them and passing them off to professional writers as a way to get in.
I think that is the number one best career tip I have ever heard in my life.
Yeah, there's an old spy trick. They literally train spies when you're infiltrating a network. Never ask for anything. Get into the group and then start offering things. And I used that when I was trying to get people to pay attention to me in writing. Yeah. So I used to do stuff like I'd be in a situation where I establish a rapport with somebody. I hope they'll read me someday or give me a shot someday. But my email to them wouldn't be like, oh, man, I'm working on this great idea. I got this great thing. Or all my friends are telling me this script is great and I'd love to have a pro, sort of give me feet. I don't do that. I would be like, I had a conversation with them, or online I realized they were Dodgers fans, and I would buy like good Dodgers tickets. And then I'd email them and say, hey, man, I had these great seats for the Dodgers, but I can't make the game. Let me know if you want the thing, right? So to them, they're going to sit there.
This is why Ben is so successful in Hollywood. You are better than anyone I know.
He's half actor.
I will never be using that because I will never not use the Dodger tickets that I have.
Right.
And we got to give a shout out to Tamara, who came on and was really vulnerable about the highs and lows of being a writer.
I remember getting my first job on Warehouse 13, and after a week of being in the writer's room, and it was a big writer's room, it was like 12 or 13 people for, 10 episodes or 15 episodes. It was big. There was only one other woman in it, so it was like this big gang of loud men and me and this other woman, and it was just it was not at all what I expected. I don't know what I expected, but it was hard and it was draining. And I remember my parents coming to visit for Thanksgiving and debating whether or not to tell them, I don't know if I made the right decision. I don't know if I want to do this.
Why were you finally got there? What happened in that week or two on that job that you were second guessing everything?
Yeah, I think I put so much pressure on myself I wanted to be, I guess I had gotten there, and that should have been the validation that I belonged there or that I deserved to be there. But I guess I felt like every day I needed to prove that I deserved to be there. Yeah, right.
Since most of our guests want to get to the EP or showrunner level like our celebrities, let's get back to some of our favorite advice from this last year of the Writer's Room. I think the most useful advice for me that Sam and Jim have given is to give ourselves permission to be plain. We have to create a scaffolding with the plot that then more interesting characters can hang on.
Give yourself permission to be plain on the main story. Now, it's not that simple, because I want to encourage you and say that when you make it plain, that'll just give you a framework. And then once you start fleshing it out, it'll get less plain and less plain as the characters make their choices. Right. Not just because they're in India, but because they are individual people.
And it builds its own momentum.
Right. And so then the story starts becoming not plain. And in fact, what happens, or at least happens to us, is then we start worrying that we started out with a very simple story and now we're complicated again. Because people are complicated. We ended up trying to dial it back from that.
Right.
I think that totally applies to sci-fi. I mean, to everything, but especially to sci-fi. You wrote a sci-fi recently, wasn't it? Or was it a fantasy?
It was a fantasy, but I mean, it applies. Sci-fi and fantasy are lumped together for a reason.
Yeah, same. Like something that has a lot of world building, because you are totally about making everything cool. And so they talk a lot about that, particularly in episode 14, a little less sci, a little more fi, with Jana Richardson, which I love. That's one of my favorite episodes. And about how to get through the world building elements of it and to keep the magic or the sci-fi as simple and clear as possible. And that's creating that scaffolding. That is your world building, so that your characters can move around and be the real complex living beings that you want them to be.
all the stuff Sam's pitching about going through the characters and finding their motivations and playing with them is all great, but you have to have this fundamental rule about what's going on and what people want. When it's shaping your rules of your sci-fi universe, you need to know a couple of those pieces in order to know what to pick and choose from as you're coming up with character stuff.
In fact, I would advocate what is the dumbest circa 1950 like just simple version of this. Start there, and then you can make it. You can add more rules and change what people are doing and all that. But I would go that simple because it's not a book. In books, it's very different because then you can explain it whatever you want. There's more time. But in TV, I got to tell you, we write genre all the time, and then we always are getting questions about the rules, and that's why sometimes Supernatural is better.
You can wave a wand, literally.
So another thing that I really struggle with is I want a lot of time to establish my ideas so that when I finally give you the punch, it punches as hard as possible.
That sounds like a good thing.
Oh, it's not, because I'm wasting 10 pages at the top of every script just telling you to wait and wait. It's going to get cool. It's going to get there. And in episode 17, Sam gave some of my favorite advice to turn it up to 11 and find cool stuff.
We want to turn that up, in my opinion, to like 11 because it'll make it easier for you. And you're like, you got it almost there. And that's why I asked you, what's the cool stuff? Because once you figure out what's cool, that's that. And I being cool, I mean, is also terrible, right? For her.
Yeah.
But if it's terrible for her, it's beautiful for you.
But you know what's interesting is I think what he actually means a lot of times by turning it up to 11, because I think he's talking about character. And we think typically, I say we, maybe it's just me in my dumb mind. I'm like, turn it up to 11. That means I've got to have some cool plot thing. Like I have to have explosions or, car chase or whatever it is. But what he's actually talking about is knowing who your characters are, getting them crystal clear, and then pushing whatever those traits are, I think, up to 11. And then you get to see the real conflict come out in a scene, which I think is a hugely beneficial and important lesson to learn. I keep drilling down on your characters and figuring out who they are and what they want and how that's in conflict with each other. And the only way you can do that is if you push them to 11.
I think I learned something just now. Learned the difference between a staff writer and somebody who has yet to be a staff writer.
You're welcome. One of my favorite highlights from the season was from a very early episode, actually, episode 2, Make Your Protagonist Their Own Worst Enemy with Kat Boyd, where they were talking with Kat Boyd about her Detroit-based police task force pilot called the D. And they were talking about the concept of corruption and how you have to give corruption a face. And to me, that sort of drove home, like when we're starting out with an idea, we're like, oh, I want to talk about the environment, or I want to talk about family trauma, or whatever your theme is or your concept is, but you have to create a character who is the embodiment of whatever that theme or idea is.
The idea that you're going to see people living in these houses, these projects, these developments, and they're pawns, right, in the middle, right. And that humanizes this, so it's not an intellectual thing. Right. That's always to me, the question, when you have payoffs and that, I'm like, what does it matter? Corruption. You want to see corruption? Just look at, the New York Stock Exchange. Corruption it's hard to understand. Right. But when you see people suffer at the hands of it, in The Wire, later on, the mayor, basically because of his own corruption of his soul, he deprived the police and the schools of money because he needed to. So, but that's interesting. But then we saw the cops suffering, and we'd already seen an entire season of the schools suffering. Who's going to suffer as a result of that? And those are the characters.
And how do we see it?
And how do we see it? And now you're saying, oh my God, we can get into the projects and see who lives there.
After all these tips, it gets a little bit confusing to keep writing. And I think Lauren said it best in episode 13.
I have the little Mac rainbow wheel going on in my head right now.
Totally. That's so real.
Something that I didn't expect coming in was all of the wisdom that our guests were going to drop on us, not about writing, but about life itself.
So true. There's been like really interesting people on the podcast.
There's been incredibly fascinating people. I don't know what I was expecting too, because I maybe just thought it was going to be all people like me who had gone to engineering school and wanted to be screenwriters.
There are so many of you. Like that's basically what all writers are.
As far as I know. But Mary Birdsong in episode 7 had some of my favorite life advice. And it was to care about somebody else and in that way learn to love yourself, which I thought was cool just for life and for some of my characters.
You could love her despite the fact that she's not the person that you always wanted her to be. And there's a profound recognition of humanity and how fucked up we
right. And also,
really
I feel this is something I feel, and again, this maybe not breaking it down, but something I feel kind of passionate about that I learned, I think, from taking care of my mom, is I feel like my whole generation has been fed a line of bullshit, which is, well, how can I really love you when I don't even love myself?
Yeah.
And it's like, I've got to learn to love myself first. And it's like, fuck you. How about you learn to love somebody else? And then you'll feel loved. Do you know what I mean?
I definitely took that for the protagonist of the sample that I'm writing. I took that very advice and made that her entire ethos.
I love that.
We've been working really hard.
Yeah, like, I mean, it's a little serious up on here, JR. Like, you're so serious. It's your engineering mind.
It just goes to work and I can't shut it off.
Yeah. So, yeah, we need, like, a dopamine break. Like, let's hear a little bit of, like, the guys ripping on each other.
Oh, no. Shut up.
No, but I think so. I mean, I think that's...
Don't
listen
to him. Don't listen to him.
Makes it serious.
Nope. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about Falcon and the Winter Soldier on ABC. I'm sorry, ABC Disney. Sorry,
Disney, but it's all one.
Jesus Christ, it's Marvel, motherfucker. God damn.
So some people have girlfriends, and Jim had history books. It's
Does that make any fucking sense at all?
all right, hold on a second. First, let's settle something. Malcolm, was he listening to my pitch? Because I don't think that was actually related to my pitch.
It wasn't.
Okay, thank you.
Threw your pitch.
Thank you.
What, I said something.
out.
I mentioned the parents and the daughter. That's what he was talking about.
Bullshit.
It's interesting.
Oh, this is it?
This is it.
I'm always confused. Sometimes I'm like, okay, we're going to go for it. Obviously, I've just ruined it.
Well,
so
what I
we're gonna do it
like,
again.
no, we can keep this. What I like about it is that I get to prove how confused you are. It makes me feel better as a writing partner.
I think any partner you have would be confused, just so we're clear. As soon as the mic goes off, then Jim hurts me.
Whew, I feel better. All right, Megan, now back to our regularly scheduled programming.
One of the things that has been discussed a couple of times on the podcast, both just Sam and Jim talking about it and also with our guests, is the idea of how you have to live a bit of life before you can actually write faithfully. And that's something that I swear to God, you can't understand until you've actually done it. I joke around and say only old people can write drama, and that's why I can be a drama writer now. Like, I'm there. You have to be able to live in certain emotions, in certain emotional states, and let like pain come out, and love, and these really deep things that, you know, it's not about your age, it's about your maturity level and knowing yourself and knowing other people in a really profound way that creates this well of emotion for your characters and your stories.
You know, I mean, there's something to be said for maturity, too. Like, when you're writing stories just out of, you know, you can fall into that O. Henry mode because you're just sort of making stuff up out of thin air. But the older you get, the more mature you get, I think you begin to resonate with characters because you've been through some stuff yourself and you start feeling it more. And it changes your stories. They get more emotional, I think.
Yeah, 100%. Right. And, you know, this goes into Jim and I when we were starting out. When I was trying to talk him into opening a restaurant with me, which was right when we graduated from college, I said, dude, we're 22 years old, man. What are we going to write about? Yeah, we can make up a bunch of stuff, but we didn't really know anything. And now that I'm a lot older than 22, I'm like, I was right.
Yeah, that definitely resonates with me too, because I lost both of my grandfathers in the span of 11 months. And I don't think it's any coincidence that next year is when I really felt like I was learning to write, because going through those events, surprising things happen that you don't expect.
Such as, I mean, if you don't mind sharing.
I remember I remember giving my grandfather's eulogy, and in the first 2 sentences, I was choking back tears. But as I got further into the eulogy, it was a wash of relief, and I felt the physical manifestation of the grieving process. And I felt the love of everybody at the funeral service reflected back towards me. And had I never gone through that, I would never know how to write any sort of character grieving, I don't think.
Sure. What you're talking about, feeling people's love reflected back at you, I think that's actually kind of what the storytelling process is about. This is something that I'm learning as I mature as a person. Forget writing aside, like, you can only go so far on the surface, and then there has to be, layers have to be stripped away. You have to get vulnerable to put a certain amount of yourself out there, and then people will reflect that back to you, and that's how you form a genuine connection with people. And as writers, that's how we form genuine connections with our audience. And until you're able to do that, until you're willing to do that, you probably can only just skim the surface with your stories.
Yeah, and it takes a certain amount of confidence and bravery to put yourself on the page like that.
Yeah, it really does. Like, I'm not sure that I'm there yet. I'm trying to get there. That's, I guess everyone's goal. It's like you learn the craft. And this podcast is such an excellent resource for learning the craft. But then at a certain point, you have to go deeper, and that does involve making yourself vulnerable on the page. And that's a very scary thing to do.
Yeah, and I think we should take another moment to recognize the confidence and bravery of all of our guests for coming on and sharing their stories on the air.
Yeah,
I can't think of anything scarier, especially the scene study people.
Big time.
They're really putting it out there to get better, and it's inspiring.
Yeah, like, if you guys are listening to this right now, you're all amazing. Like, that's one of the reasons why I was a shadow listener for so long, because I'm like, oh, they can put themselves out there, and I can just, like, suck from them. I don't have to actually put myself out there. But yeah, it's, oh my God, it's such an incredibly, like, brave and scary thing to do if you do it for real, if you go all in.
Right. And that's the key. I think making authentic characters is doing it for real.
Yes.
Speaking of authentic characters and an authentic world, Meagan, I know you really liked episode 32, Find Your Core Idea and Toss the Rest, with Doris McGill, and her story, Baby Gay.
Baby Gay, it was such an interesting episode because they start off with some really excellent advice about the log line.
That's a terrible log line. Right? And I say that with love, only because, first of all, I want to say that log lines in general suck, and they never really tell you anything that they're all, Jim and I have sat there and tortured them to death. I'm sure you have too. Right. And with the reason, so I just want to beat up on your log line for just a second.
Yes, please.
With apologies, not so that we can get a good log line, but so that it already demonstrates an issue with the show. I can guess, because I don't know. What I don't know coming out of that is what the problem is.
Here's the thing, like, if it sounds like this is not actually a show, but if it was, a woman moves in with her boyfriend and finds herself falling in love with his lesbian roommate, boom, that's a log line. I know what the problem is.
Okay.
Yeah, because now we want to get the sense that it's ongoing. By the way, this is one of those things where I think if you get 10 writers, you're going to get 27 opinions. So for everyone out there who is yelling at their car radio or whatever they're listening through, this is not. I just want you to know, I know you're yelling at me, but.
Another thing that I found so interesting about this episode was that the writer Doris, she started off basically giving a lot of backstory about her character. And so the conversation about, what this story was and what the show was going to be was kind of going in one direction. And then she got to, well, this is the world that I want the series to take place in. And all of a sudden it was like everybody lit up and it was like, oh, this is so interesting.
What I kind of want to do is just have it be Jackie ends up reconnecting with this girl that she was freshman roommates with, who is a born and raised New Yorker and an out lesbian, who kind of helps her find her place in the community. And what I wanted to, this is very broad, but what I wanted to focus on, there's a lot of coming out stories where someone comes out, it's super hard, and then they meet the love of their life and everything is great forever. And I think that in real life, coming out, especially I think in New York, where there is a pretty big queer community, it's sort of like starting a new high school. And you have to find your people, your cliques. There's different, inside jokes, different styles for different cliques and things like that. And there's the mean girls and there's the fuck boys. And it's very different from, I think, what most people expect. That's, once you can be your true self, then like you're going to be happy forever. And really, it's just like, any other group of human beings where there are people who are really nasty and it's really hard and it takes a really long time to find your place.
It's 10 times more interesting than everything we've talked about to this point.
100%.
That concept of, coming out in New York is like starting a new high school. Boom.
Yes.
This realization of what the story actually is really the best part of being in a writer's room. Breakthroughs like that. And later on in this episode, Jim and Sam hit on a problem that I actually have a lot of issues with, which is backstory getting in the way of the story that I'm trying to tell.
This is everything that matters.
Yeah, and as you're talking about this, I don't care about the sorority, college, like any of that stuff, like all that backstory. That can come up as she's talking to other people. I don't even think that's important.
It's actually really comforting to know that I'm not the only one with this specific issue. We talk about it in episode 9 with Sean McCann and episode 25 with Ellie Lorscheid.
All right, first of all, let me just say about backstory. Backstory is great, but only if it gives me front story, right? Otherwise, it has no value. And let me start by saying, I'm sure this is true for other people who are listening, I'm drowning already.
Right. Who's your main character? What does she care about? And what pulls us into this story in the pilot?
And the reason I mentioned that, and that's yes to what Jim was saying, but the reason I mentioned that is I'm feeling that way, and I just had to listen to it for 1 minute. But you, Ellie, have been living in it for a while, and that must be hard. And that, and so what we need to do is cut that stuff loose, right? So we can do a television show, and this is a good example of how backstory and all that stuff can really get in the way. We also need it. We also need it. So
right, you need answers for the questions when they come up, but then you don't want to say anything about it until those questions do in fact come up.
Right, exactly.
Meagan, I think it's high time for another one of our
dopamine breaks.
So when we started the show, Sam knew that one of our strengths was going to be this sound right here.
But it's
all right, let's get back to it. In episode 13, which had one of my favorite titles, Series Bibles and the Coincidence of Sperm with Lauren White.
That was a good one. Now, who thought that up, JR?
You know what? Some of the producer, whoever he is, has control over the titles, and we'll just leave it at that.
All right. Nicely done, producer, whoever he is.
Whoever he may be. But at the end of the episode, Sam and Jim gave a really amazing tool for our writer's toolbox, which is character matrices.
The matrix part is basically on one side, you just list every character, however many there are, probably more than 4. But your characters, say 6, just for pick a number. And then on the bottom, you list those 6 again. And so now you are saying, what is the relationship between Tom and Susan? What's the relationship between Tom and Betsy? What's the relationship between Tom, every single character? And what's the relationship between Tom and Tom? How does he feel about himself? What are his issues? And as you get into those, and that's just an exercise.
And you can expand that to the major topics of the show, like siblings, blood ties, like some of these other main points you're hitting, because for 3 of the characters, the idea of siblings, that unusual families can happen in this kind of way could seem perfectly logical. But for one person, that's insanity. That's not a real family. And they refuse to recognize that.
So I would just make Tom's family. I would careful about
Tom, Ray, family, Susan, Ray, family.
Learning about the character matrix really helped me get my thoughts organized. Meagan, do you have a favorite writing tool that you learned in this last year?
One of the things that I have tended to struggle with in my writing is how to make people care about characters. It's like this whole mysterious thing. Like sometimes I'll write something and people love it, or they love the character. And sometimes I love the character and people are just like, meh, I don't give a shit, right?
It's like posting a picture of your child on Instagram. I don't give a shit about that kid.
That's right. You need some context or something. It's like there's some kind of special magic to it. And so in episode 12, Starting Hot and Letting Go of Early Drafts with Adam Morwinski, Sam and Jim give a really helpful tool to make that happen, to how to make people care about your characters, talking about giving them an internal drive versus an external drive.
Why do we care? What is the things on the line for these people, and why are they so passionate about it?
When we say, why do we care, it can't be because they are helping homeless children. That's external. Right. That's not a character thing. If you're saying it's I want to know why are they helping these homeless
Were they
people?
A homeless child?
Yeah.
Then it gets more interesting.
If one of them has an original sin, the rich guy has something that he did that he's making up for, or his family did.
His dad was a developer who wiped out a bunch of affordable housing.
All of these are trite a little bit, by the way, and I'm not saying this is, but this is first idea theater.
And that highlight pairs really, really well with a highlight of mine from episode 26. Cool Dads Use Cheap Deep to Efficiently Add Heart with Philip Cordell.
That was such a fun episode.
And Cheap Deep is a great writer's tool because it makes people immediately care.
Absolutely. Yeah. And cheap deep. I'd never heard that term before, but it's like a simple, straightforward thing that once you learn it, you can use it from then on out.
Yeah. Humans are not that complicated. We all want the same things, and Cheap Deep exploits the hell out of that.
And also, it's kind of like dudes hanging around, and they always keep it light. But then we watch commercials where something actual real happens, or we see that moment at the funeral where the dude puts his hand on the other dude's shoulder or something, and everyone starts crying immediately, right?
Right.
We need a little of that. That is cheap deep.
Yes.
As we right,
which for a sitcom kind of show is generally what you get is cheap deep.
Right.
And it works.
And I don't mean cheap. We don't mean cheap and bad, as in false. A better word would be efficient deep.
Right.
Or we don't have to kill ourselves to find that deep. I don't need a huge backstory to get that deep. You could almost tell me Rashad's thing is he is deathly afraid that he's going to be the shitty father that his father was. Right. Mm-hmm. And that would be enough for me, because now I know what drives him, and that would answer the why. And you could say, okay, but yeah, we're going to do that. His father was shitty in this way. And that's great, but that's just piling on to the cheap deep of he's afraid he's going to fuck up like his dad. And that drives comedy so hard.
All right, we've got one more tool for your writer's toolbox, and that's some strategies for dealing with writer's block.
When you're blocked, do you find yourself not even getting in the chair, or do you find yourself getting in the chair and not producing, or
Yeah, not even really getting in the chair, kind of just psyching myself up to do it and then not really doing it. I've actually found lately that writing prompts have been really helpful. They're really good to just get something on the paper, feel like you've done something with the day.
I think emotionally, if I have a day where I'm not producing what I want to be producing, then I get demoralized. Mm-hmm. And when I get demoralized, I start feeling really crappy about myself, and that makes it harder to write the next day. But the thing that solves it for me is to just get the worst version, because if I get just a version, my confidence increases, and then I can rewrite it.
Do you ever feel like you get burnt out or like you've exhausted the spigot? Because I feel like that all the time.
The thing that most helps that, Casey, in my opinion, or works for me, is that there's just a list of questions that we ask. What's the turn in the scene? What does the character want in the scene? How did the expectation change in this scene or in this arc? And if we keep going back to that, and it's so elemental, but that's all it is. It's just asking those same questions over and over and over, and it forces you, once you start answering them, you get traction. Jim and I developed something, we use phrases with each other to get permission to do something, which is, so one we created actually within the last year or two was thought experiment, meaning I don't know where the hell this is coming from. I know if we do this, we're going to lose 2 weeks of work, but maybe this thing is an answer that we should consider. Even if it could completely screw us and is inconsistent with everything and would require a change in the space-time continuum, that's okay. For the next 15 minutes, we're just going to talk about this. And I'd say a majority of the time we come up with some good stuff in there.
I think that is probably, at least personally, is something that gives me writer's block a lot. I'm always like, I don't have time to go down that avenue. I've done all this work. I have to stop right here and keep going down this path.
You know, what's interesting about that, Casey, is a lot of times if you're having the urge to go down that path, it means you probably should go down that path because something in the back of your head is tickling you. And sometimes you waste more time by not going down the path because you're like, nope, I'm not going to think about that. I'm going to do this. And you get done and you look back and go like, oh, it's not working. I should have thought about that.
Now, Meagan, I know you wanted to talk about something a little bit more difficult,
So one of the things that I have learned being in the writers' rooms that I have been very privileged to be in is that you have to be prepared to talk about anything. And that could be, your deep, dark secrets, or it could be whatever's happening in the news or what people are experiencing in their daily lives. And so politics comes up a lot. And this is something that I don't think happens in any other field where you're just sitting in a room with people and you have to be able to have a political discussion and be civil and continue working with each other.
They call it not safe for work for a reason.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of not safe for work conversations that go on in a writer's room.
And that's not to say that these conversations are disrespectful in any way, right?
No, of course not. It's that they are not safe. Because they tend to elicit very strong emotions from people. And that is one of the most valuable skills that a TV writer can have, is the ability to talk about these difficult subjects and with people that either, you come from very different backgrounds, or maybe you don't understand each other, or you disagree with each other, and you come to a new understanding. And that's how we learn and grow, and we can move the needle in some ways as writers. And I think that's a very important part of what we do in TV.
So you're saying these writers have their own arc over the course of a season?
You just went really deep there. I'm going to have to go home and think about that for a while. But yeah, so just for instance, I thought there are so many interesting conversations that took place in the writer's room with Sam and Jim. And so one really interesting example to me was Malcolm Spellman's comments on race and character.
I think what happens is, I know you guys see this, whether it's race or backstory or whatever, right? Writers tend to start spinning their wheels and getting hyper-focused on things that are not forward driving as far as story or forward driving as far as character. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And you can lose days talking about events and politics and philosophies that swirl around your character, and still not be walking away with anything that's actionable, anything that's going to allow this character to define a scene, right? Like if your character was involved with the Panther movement, and then you start to dig into that and you're spiraling and you're unpacking all that history, right?
Right.
You still got to know whether he or she was involved in the Panther movement in a way that creates behavior and psychology that's going to define the scenes they walk into.
That's
or
right.
did they go through something? You know what I'm saying? Like, none of that matters. And the shit that does matter is always so simple and so rudimentary. Like, if he was involved with the Panther movement and he's one of the people COINTEL ran psyops on and fucked up mentally, well, now we know you have a volatile person who's psychologically damaged, and then that backstory matters. But first, you need to know what makes this character define a scene they walk into.
We were in a room where on a gender issue, this came out, and there were a couple people throwing down over whether, one person felt it was wrong to portray people of that gender as anything other than completely virtuous, and the other person was saying, yeah, except for story's sake, people have to have flaws. Right, and we spent days going in circles on some character
it certainly
issues.
Felt that way.
Going down the same political path, one of my favorite conversations that we had in the room was with Yasmina Seif in episode 27.
Yeah, that was a great one.
Talking about writing characters as a biracial person.
She is mixed race. And I totally agree. It's so hard. And I also do find it a bit of a blind spot, and not just in media, in my whole life. A couple of months ago, my Indian grandpa went, "Do you think you're Indian?" And I was like, wow, okay, that's a big question to unpack here, Grandpa, while you're stuffing tomatoes down. It's so hard. And I think we are all kind of fucked. And I had a very interesting conversation with someone when I was in Chicago about this. She wanted me to write a short for her, which was about two Ghanaian girls going back to Ghana. And I was like, I would love to. I love working with you, but I obviously have absolutely no reason to write this whatsoever apart from that. But when we had this conversation, we realized that we had so much in common. And I think that the being third culture or mixed race, it does have a lot of universality, which I think we definitely should explore. And I'm not saying that, it should be specific people exploring it, but I definitely think there are so many great stories that can be told. And I think a lot of people feel like they're not one thing enough or not another thing enough. Yeah, I would just like to see more of it because I have a very weird relationship with my identity.
I think that discussion was something sort of unique to us at this point in time because not a lot of other people are talking through what it means to be biracial at a time in America where everybody is evaluating their own racial identity.
Exactly. I totally agree. And I think that's one of the things that I get from it as a listener is getting to listen in on these conversations with these writers from all over the world. There are, people calling in from all over the place and people from all different backgrounds, and they all have this very unique life experience and point of view, and they're bringing that to their stories, and that instigates these conversations about topics that normally we kind of feel are taboo in our day-to-day lives.
Very well said. All right, I think it's time we lighten things up a little. Megan, what do you got?
One of my favorite things about the show, I keep saying this is my favorite thing. I fucking love this show. I can't help it. Everything is my favorite. I'll come up with my least favorite thing about the show in a second, just to spice it up a little bit. Yeah.
So that we know you're not a liar.
That's right. I'm not a shill. I am a genuine human being, and I do have the ability to critique. It's Jim's jokes, man. I fucking love Jim's jokes. I have such a corny sense of humor. He plays right to my crowd.
Does she have to deliver a new leader within like 24 hours because it's Prime?
No, I'm not giving you that one. Jim got me a bottle of whiskey called Writer's Tears.
Oh, I've actually had that. One of my close friends got me that for my birthday this year.
I think
it's so appropriate. It's not as bitter as you'd expect.
It's Peak TV.
Peak TV,
right?
Yeah.
I watched House MD.
You take a peek and then you go on to something else.
Well, that's true too.
Yeah.
Yes, this is his driver of this episode. This is the driver of his character for the season, which will help me figure out more about his character. Let's try some moves. Let's try him doing this, trying that. This is what gets in his way, and it all starts coming into focus. But it's got to be specifics.
Got to reach into that golf bag and get out your driver.
Yeah.
I'd just like to apologize for Jim Dunn today. I don't know if it's the golf thing that's bad. Or
I was just trying to tee him up.
His medication is off. Don't laugh, Mark. Mark, stop. Don't. Just
it's all right.
Mark, hit mute on your phone, please. If that.
No, it's okay, Jim. That was a hole in one. So
there we go.
Wow.
There we
now
go.
You're making Jim sound good.
I'm just puttering around.
Oh, no. This is an excellent time to leave this episode.
So we've only got a few highlights left in this episode for y'all. Let's go to a plot tip. It's not very often that on day one you learn something, but in our very first episode with Aaron Cron, I learned what proved to be one of the most important things I took away from this podcast.
Ooh.
So the first act break to me, and I think this is common, is it kind of defines the central dilemma of the show.
And that's sort of been my North Star as I've been working on my sample. Megan, do you have a plot highlight for us?
The specific sample that Sam and Jim read, one of the most difficult things for me is that there are so many ideas all competing with each other. And when you've been working on something for long enough, you get to this point where you're just like this brain fog. Like you have no idea what's interesting or what's not, or what moves the story forward or what doesn't. And you love everything and you hate everything. And so there was this one really great episode. It was episode 4, Don't Be Fooled, Nothing Happens by Mistake, with Stacey Limbriser.
It sounds to me like a question of emphasis, right? And job one is to, what is your character's arc? And then how do we see that across the pilot? And once you have that story of how do we get on her team, on Team Sarah here, that's the spine of the show, and all the rest of that stuff can be saved for episode 2, or used to illustrate her story, because her story is the only thing that matters. The rest of it's all bullshit.
Yeah, that's the hard truth. Wow, you just said it like that. That's brutal.
I think we have time for one more highlight. And Megan, now that you're an official member of the team, I'm going to lean on you. You got one last one for us?
Another one of my favorite elements, I guess you could say, of the podcast is Sam and Jim's rants. I love their rants because it's like behind the scenes stuff, and you're getting to listen to some really high level professional writers and like how they think and how they approach life. And
these guys are storytellers, so it's always fun to hear a story.
Totally, yeah. And one of my favorite stories, so to speak, is from episode 20, Huckster Grandpa and Other Story Engines for Liars. Another great title to the producer, whoever he is.
I hope he's listening.
No, he never listens to this. But it's, Sam telling a story about a time when he was feeling a certain kind of way and wished that he had spoken out about it at that time. And I think he really goes there talking about what it's like to be a writer.
All right, Jim, I don't often get to tell you stories you've never heard before.
Never, for about 15 years.
That's not true. Every now and again, you'll come up with one. I'll come up with one and be like, I never heard that. Half the time it's because I forgot that ever happened to me, and I'm running into someone who reminds me of something.
Right.
But in this case, this is a story I think you have heard. We haven't talked about a lot. JR, you haven't heard it, which is when we had a podcast before podcasting was cool. And I remember in that podcast, one night, I was at a low point. I had a baby and a part-time teacher wife, and I was in my house, and I wasn't making any money, and I wanted to come out to my garage where we did our podcast and just turn it on and do this 1 a.m., 2 a.m. monologue, which we had never done anything like that before, and then talk about this thing. And I really wish I had. It's one of my regrets. But what I was going to say was that we're all suckers. We all fall in love with this Horatio Alger dream that is specific to our business, which is we're going to come out and we're going to suffer and pay dues, and then eventually the gates will open and we're going to go in there and it's going to be a whole new experience. And what
it's because I think it's because that's how it works in the movies.
Right.
There's something about chasing being in movies and then actually watching movie stories where people go out and because they're good and because they did the right thing, they make it in.
That's right. And the problem is you come out and first of all, it doesn't work that way 99% of the time. And the struggle is real. And for a lot of people, it doesn't work. And then they end up going to do something else. And I wish people will be honest about that and then not look at the idea that it didn't work and then they go do something else as a pure failure, because it's not. I've tried a lot of things that didn't stick for whatever particular reason, and things happen. I mean, hell, our restaurants went out of business in 9/11 and all that kind of stuff. I mean, there's a certain amount of failure in life. But that's not my point. That I don't want to talk about, you come out here and it won't work. What I was upset about was that the dream was corrupted with this fable that is sold in movies and television. Because the dream isn't really that the gates open and then everything becomes easy and you get all this money and everything's fantastic and you write an Academy Award-winning or Emmy Award-winning show. That's not the way it works. And I remember once we sold a feature, and the way we sold it was our then manager was having lunch with an executive, and he said, two of my clients have this idea, and the guy loved it. And basically, the manager sold the idea, and you said, I wish he hadn't sold it. I would have wished we would have sold it. And I was like, dude, at our level, that's how stuff happens. And it worked. This is a normal way.
It's true.
But because you had an idea of how it was going to be a success. And I wish that I could go back to myself on that night at 2 a.m. when I was laying in bed sweating about how am I going to make this work. And I had said to myself, you are making this work. It's happening right now by sticking it out. And it's not going to happen that you're going to get that magic text on your phone tomorrow, or that your script that is going to be handed to somebody and everything's going to change and you're going to get called up to the majors. It's going to be incremental growth. I'm going to get to be a better writer tomorrow because I'm going to keep writing. I just have to stick it out. And if I do decide not to stick it out, it's not because I'm weak. It's not because I give up. It's because my priorities changed, and it's my life, and that's the way it works. And this whole confection that has come up, which I now realize it's poison, because if your trajectory is not that, then who are you, and are you ever a success? And that's the thing that was weighing me down at 2 a.m., and that's the message that I wish I could go back and tell that guy. So I'm telling you, and by you I mean Jim, but I also mean anybody who's listening to it, there's no one version, and there's no best way, and there's no one path. It is what we make of it. There's no failure or success. It's just how we feel about it. And whether we can control that or not, well, that's why we have best friends and wives and husbands and whiskey and whatever else we need to process it all. But don't believe the lie. Just believe in what we're actually doing.
Amen, brother.
Those are all the highlights we've pulled. And if you're looking for more highlights, tips, and advice on writing, you can go to our YouTube page where we've pulled a highlight from every single episode under our Story Break playlist. And I'm sure all of our listeners out there have their own highlights, hopefully, that have helped them with their samples.
Yeah, and if you've got something that you really love from season 1, let us know, share it on social media, tell us all about it. Even if it's something you hated, that's fine too. You know, we take it both ways.
Yeah, notes are a writer's best friend.
That's right. Yeah, and we'll figure out whatever the note behind your note is.
We'll block your Twitter and we will... No, we'll be very grateful for anybody that helps us get better.
Yeah, but let us know.
And that is the end of our first season. Going forward in season 2, we even don't know what changes might be in store, but we're definitely cooking some stuff up.
Yeah, we've got great guests coming in. I'm super excited about some of the people we've got coming up next.
And one of our biggest changes is you're going to be hearing a little bit more from Meagan.
From JR.
And from JR.
He's going to talk now, guys. So exciting.
I've learned to talk, and you won't stop me now.
Yeah, typical writer.
But this is turning into a real room now. We've got 2 EPs, we've got a staff writer, a writer's assistant, and we're also going to have our guests as usual.
That's right, our guest show creators.
So pull up a chair and sit in the room with us. It's going to be a good time. And that's all we've got for you until season 2, which you won't have to wait very long. It'll be on our regular schedule of episodes.
Thanks for listening, you guys. If you want to hit us up with a review or comments on Apple Podcasts or check us out online, please do. We're at the Sam and Jim on Twitter and Instagram, and
on Facebook, we're The Writer's Room with Sam and Jim, and you can find us that way on YouTube as well. And I've always wanted to say this. It's going to feel more real coming from me. Tell a friend about us so we can get JR paid.
Talk to you next time.